Okay, here we go. Welcome to the Thursday night class. Tonight we're going to start a new discourse. The big Yom Tov that's coming up next week is the 12th of Tammuz and the 13th day of Tammuz, which is the day that the previous Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, was released from his release to go home from his exile, which was supposed to be 3 years, but then it lasted for a week and they let him go. A week earlier was his beginning of his release. When they sent him to exile, this sent him off for a 3-year hellish experience. But he went out of the dungeon of their insane, notorious, dangerous prison called Shpolerenka. When they let him out, when he came out from there, he was forced to leave on exile. So he stood on the train station, and as he was leaving, he said some remarks to the Hasidim that were gathered. Spoke like a lion, in complete defiance of the KGB, and they were all there. They heard what he was saying. They just almost. He came so close, not being in this world anymore, and barely escaped their clutch. And still not. He was still under their control because they were sending him off to exile. And yet he spoke about the continuation of the work for what they put him into prison for to begin with, the strengthening of Judaism. That happened on the 3rd day of Tammuz, in Gimmel Tammuz. So that's why I mentioned in the other classes that Gimmel Tammuz is the beginning of the redemption for the previous Rebbe. And then the Rebbe, on Gimmel Tammuz, we have our Gimmel Tammuz. So that tells us that what looks like a day of darkness and concealment is really not that. It's the beginning of redemption. So our Rebbe, in 5724, which is 1964, the Rebbe said a discourse on Gimmel Tammuz. It was Shabbos Parshas Korach Gimmel Tammuz, in which he based his discourse on the words his predecessor had said, his father-in-law had said, when he was on the train station. And the Rebbe blows up that teaching and reveals unbelievable depth of what was then said. It seems to be more of a simple statement, but it was very, 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 the Rebbe really, really learns it and reveals the unbelievable depth of what was being said and the incredible courage and the incredible selflessness that was being conveyed. There were only 2 discourses. The Rebbe said many discourses on the 3rd of Tammuz. I don't know how many, but he said some. He definitely said on many discourses on the 12th of Tammuz, which is celebrated as a holiday in Chabad. But on the 3rd of Tammuz, the Rebbe said some discourses. But from all of those that the Rebbe said, 2 of them the Rebbe edited. This is one of the 2 that he edited on Gimmel Tammuz. And that's why I think that it has lessons particularly for the current Gimmel Tammuz as well. In other words, the Rebbe was saying it regarding the Gimmel Tammuz of his father-in-law. But we all know the Rebbe has his own Gimmel Tammuz. So there is, which people interpret as kind of the Rebbe's conclusion. The Rebbe ended his work and so on and so forth. But when you read the Maimer that we're going to learn today, that discourse, you're going to see that it's like prophetic. And it's got such incredible, it negates so essentially the external understanding of Gimmel Tammuz, as we're going to see. For me, this discourse personally is giving me a lot of strength. I learned it on the past week like 3 times, personally. And I'm chewing on it still. It's very, very powerful and very, very, very essential. So I hope you're going to find it as well as enlightening as I do and as meaningful as I do. And that's the discourse. It's to be found in Sefer Melukut, Chelik Dalet, the 4th volume. It's the Mimer on Gimmel Tamuz. It's called Yehi Hashem Elokeinu Imanu. And, or in the Maimarim Melukut that is based already on the months of the year, it's right in the beginning of the volume of Tammuz. So that's what we're going to learn. And it's going to probably take us 2 weeks, like this week and next week. And fantastic. So let me first open up with what the previous Rebbe said. Okay? So the previous Rebbe is standing on the platform. The train is about to come. He's going to be sent away from his family, from his Hasidim, saying goodbye for 3 years. Now to compare that, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's father was also sent away for a couple of years, but he never came home. So just to show you that even though he survived the years, but then he was so broken and so whatever, and he ended up getting ill and sick and passed away. What they sent people was sometimes so inhabitable, so unlivable. The Friedrich Rebbe wasn't a healthy person that as well. He had gone through tremendous already, what they did to him just in the prison there for the time. So even he was going into a very, very unknown, dark saga in his life. And yet he's standing like with courage. When you hear the words that he said, it was incredible. So he started off saying like this. He begins with a pasuk, a verse from Kings, that King Solomon said. Shlomo Melech said this verse as a prayer when he was doing the inauguration of the temple. When he was inaugurating the temple, he said this prayer. What was the prayer? It says, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu kasher hoya im aviseinu. That, it's in Kings number 1, verse 8. It's Kings 1, because we know Kings have two volumes. Kings 1, chapter 8, verse 57. Perek Ches, Pasuk Nun Zayin, and Malachim Aleph. What does it say? So King Solomon says a prayer. That God should be with us like he was with our forefathers. Al Yazveinu va'al Yachenu. He should not forsake us, and he should not abandon us. So King Solomon is praying that just like God was with King David, and with the patriarchs, or I don't know, whoever he's included in forefathers, so God should be with us, meaning with our generation, King Solomon's generation. God should not forsake us and should not abandon us. Prayer. We can understand why the previous Rebbe is saying that, opening up with that verse. He's praying, and he has a big request that God should not forsake him, just like God has not forsaken our parents. Now, who does he mean with his parents? Over here, he's referring particularly to his father, the great his predecessor, the Rebbe Rashab, his grandfather, the Rebbe, the 5th Rebbe, the Rebbe Marash, his great grandfather, the Tzemach Tzedek, his great grandfather, the Mittler Rebbe, and his great grandfather, the Alter Rebbe. So all the Chabad Rebbeim, that God was always with them. The Alter Rebbe also came out of prison. Miraculously, the Mittler Rebbe came out of prison. Tzemach Tzedek had to fight with the Russian government, with the Tsars. So he's basically, it's a request that just as God showed he was always with his parents, God should be with him, with the Rebbe, together with the Hasidim. The Rebbe knew he's not in it alone; he's in it with the Hasidim, with everybody together. But the Friedrich Rebbe translated it as follows: the word Yehi can mean he should be, or it can be he will be. It can be a prayer, or it can be a statement, a declaration. So the Friedrich Rebbe translated in Yiddish. I mean, he quotes the verse. He begins with the verse. We're familiar with this verse because we say it in the Hakafos during Ata Aresa. This is one of the verses that are said before we dance with the Torah on Simchas Torah. We say, I think, I don't know how many, about 20 verses. This is one of those verses that we say. Hashem Elokeinu imanu, kasher hayam aviseinu, al yazveinu ve'al yachenu. Like, that's one of the verses we say. So that verse, the previous Rebbe said there, but he translates Yehi with two meanings. Yehi, God should be with us. That's a prayer. And also a declaration, Yehi, he will be with us. It's a promise. He's declaring God will be with absolute certainty. That's what he says. Hashem Yisbarach Zol. He says in Yiddish, Hashem Yisbarach Zol sein mit uns. God should be with us. That's a request. In Ved sein mit uns, and he definitely will be with us. Kasher hoyem aviseinu, like he was with our fathers. Then the previous Rebbe continues and he says like this: What's the novelty? He was with our fathers, going to be with us. Why shouldn't he? So he explains what's the novelty. Even though we cannot compare ourselves to our fathers, that's why we're asking. Because even though we cannot, we're incomparable to our fathers. They deserved God to be with them, and we don't. Yet we're asking He should be with us, and we're also declaring that He definitely will be with us, even though we don't deserve it, because we're unlike our fathers. Now, why are we not like our fathers? So he gives a reason. He says, because our fathers, they were literally people of self-sacrifice for Torah and mitzvahs. And we can't compare to them because they were willing to lay everything down for God for Torah and mitzvahs. And we cannot compare. Now you see what the Rebbe is going to be busy with. You can already see what's going to be what's problematic over here. The Friedrich Rebbe is saying, how can we compare ourselves to our fathers? Our fathers were willing to stretch their neck out for God. And therefore, how can we even compare ourselves to them? And yet, God will be with us. I'll leave the questions for later, but if you don't figure out the question now, then whatever. There's obviously a question right over here. In other words, in what are our fathers' specialty? What was their specialty that we don't have? That's what he's saying. What was their specialty that we don't have is that they're willing to die for Torah and mitzvot, and we're not. Right? Okay, we'll leave that for later. Like it is known, like the famous statement that one of our fathers said. Now, to prove that the fathers, and the Rebbe is not only talking about the ancient fathers, fathers of the patriarchs of the Jewish people. He's talking about his predecessors. He says, like one of our Rebbe said, and I think he means over here actually his own father, the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab, and I don't know why the Free Rebbe didn't want to say it. Maybe he didn't want to say my father in front of the KGB, that they should, even though his father passed away already, but still it would be like putting more defiance in his family directly. So maybe he said one of our fathers. I'm not actually what he said one. But what did he say? When the government wanted to force changes in Jewish education, at a certain time, the government was demanding that they should alter and include secular studies. And a lot of those secular studies were intentionally with the intention to poison the minds of the Jewish kids, to begin to insert questions in faith, and so on and so forth. So when they wanted to make these changes, one of my fathers, he said, made this statement, and wanted the rabbinate, which included the Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Rashab, to sign his name on this declaration that the rabbis are giving permission to make a new curriculum for children. So now the Rebbe is going to quote what his father said. Nicht mit unsere Willen sind wir weg von Eretz Yisrael. It's not with our will that we left Israel. In other words, we the Jewish people are in exile. But it wasn't something that we chose to do. We didn't leave Israel voluntarily. Und nicht mit unsere Keuches wollen wir zurückkommen in Eretz Yisrael. And we will not force our way back to Israel either. We were expelled from Israel by divine decree, and we're going to return to the land of Israel by divine decree. So this is not something we're choosing. Avinu Malkeinu Yisbarach hat uns vertrieben in Galus. Our Father, our King, exiled us into exile, banished us into exile. And he is going to redeem us. Now, this is all not stated in the Maimer that we're learning. I'm just reading for you the original statement that the previous Rebbe said, in which the Rebbe is going to give commentary. God was the one who banished us into exile, and God is the one who's going to return us to our land. And will gather our scattered people from the four corners of the earth. And he will lead us with an upright posture through Mashiach. Through Mashiach, the righteous Redeemer, to our holy land. Speedily in our days, amen. So, we find ourselves in exile, and this is not our choice. But that doesn't mean, the Rebbe continues, that we are vulnerable and and that we don't have any strength during the time of exile, and we must bend our heads to our host country, whoever it is that holding us, that we must be wimps in their presence and do as they want. The Jewish people are a sovereign people even when we are in exile. That's what he basically was saying. When it comes to matters of our Torah and our observance, no one has any authority over us. So the previous Rebbe is quoting his father saying, he turns to all the nations in the world, and with a stubborn Jewish defiance of thousands of years, says to all the nations that all the nations in the world need to know, as not inzit, even though we're subjugated we're living in their countries and we're subjugated to come to a certain degree to their authority. As not unsere gufim sind ibegegeben in Golus v'shibut malchus. That only our bodies were given over in the enslavement of exile and the subservience to the nations, to the kingdoms. Which means only physically we were subdued to the nations. But our souls have been in Golus nicht vertrieben. God never exiled our souls, which means spiritually he never placed us under the jurisdiction of anybody. Spiritually, we're still free. We act as Jews, and we live our Jewish life according to Torah as we see fit. And no nation in the world has any right to coerce us to make any changes in our Judaism. We will be Jewish as we know is right to be Jewish, without any compelling force in the world. And when the nations try to do that, let it be any country in the world, whether it's Soviet Russia, whether it's Tsarist Russia, whether it can be any nation in the world, they are crossing a line that they have no permission to cross, and we won't obey them. And they won't be successful in trying to subdue us, because over here, we Jews are actually free. That's what they're doing. Even in the darkest moment of exile, when it comes to our Judaism, we're free. No one has any right to tell us what to do. In Shibis Malchus nicht übergegeben, God did not banish us into exile, and he didn't make us subservient to any kingdom. Mir dafen zogin, golalein, Karlan, we shouldn't be ashamed with this. Now, obviously, this is not a man speaking it in the United States of America, where you have freedom of speech. He was speaking in times where they can, for saying, you know how it was in Russia? Not only were people in Soviet Russia, not only were people afraid to say something against the government, you were afraid to think something against the government because your neighbor can hear you thinking. That's how terrified people were from all the various different eavesdroppers and everybody was into turning people in. That was the culture. Because when you turned people in, you earned points in the whole Russian system. So you were terrified. And to these people, these were animals. They had no respect for human life at all. They killed millions and millions of people if they just had a tiny thought of you not going along with their thing. So yet the Rebbe says, as Jews, we shouldn't flinch. We have to speak it out loud and clear. in front of the eyes of everybody. As Vasas is Noigeya to when it comes to taxes, we'll pay our taxes. When it comes to obeying traffic lights, traffic laws, we'll obey traffic laws. When it comes to anything that is civil law, the laws of that you need to live by as a Russian citizen, and so on and so forth, we will obey that. As long as it doesn't cross into our business of how we educate our children and how we observe our Torah. That matters of our soul. No one should poke their nose into that. And he says, as was es negeya zu unser das, in as much as our religion is concerned, Torah, which is our Torah and our mitzvot and our observances, Hage Yisrael, and our customs, haben mir Yidden of sich nicht kein Deya Zager. We Jews don't have any. We Jews do not have any Deya Zager, which means any authorities. No one can tell us what to do. Und kein Schum Zwingkraft Tor of them nicht ausgenutzt werden. The nation should know that no force is allowed to be used. In other words, you have no permission to force us into submission when it comes to these. In other words, you can't use your guns, you can't use torture methods, you can't use prisons, you can't use any type of compelling force. You're not allowed to. In other words, to tell the nations in the world that you have to listen to God as well. And certain things we're here, certain things are not, and you must obey. And we have to say it loud and clear and not flinch when we're saying it. So they know we believe it, so they will believe it as well, because they do believe it, if we say it only proudly. These are the words of the priest. And I have to understand something. They almost killed him in a prison, in a dungeon, that you just walked in there for 5 minutes. The most hardened criminals turned to jello when they walked into those prisons. He just came out of about being there for 3 weeks, not knowing if he's going to come out alive. Been through rooms where he can hear entire night, them shooting people, torturing people, screams, blood-curdling cries. That's what the Rebbe himself describes. What kind of inhumane experience it was there. What kind of barbaric people. The soldiers that were there, the prison wardens were the most people who enjoyed literally watching people withering in pain. That was their enjoyment. Blood-splattered walls. The Rebbe says it. He spent 3 weeks over there right now and barely came out alive. And now they're exiling him. He's standing on the platform, and this is the way he's talking. That's why I say this is the Davidic family. No one else talks like that. Rabbis don't talk like that. Lions talk that way. The king talks that way. Not even a prince, not even a minister. If we would only know on what kind of fear, on what kind of state he was standing right over there, and to hear these words, and they're listening. He wasn't whispering it to the ears of the Hasidim. He was standing on the platform, speaking loud. Everybody heard him, including those who had arrested him and those who had, came so close to literally having him mir müssen sagen, and he continues, and he's still quoting his father. We need to say, mit der größter, starkste jüdische Akshanas. We need to say, with the biggest, strongest Jewish stubbornness. The Jewish people are pretty stubborn. You know why? We've been around for 3,500 years. Everybody wants us to disappear, and we haven't disappeared. So we're pretty stubborn people. Because we're not going away. I sometimes, it's amusing how the nations don't give up. Like at a certain point, you realize, okay, you got to live with the Jews. They're not going away. But you see, they're just nonstop with it. They can't finish obsessing with the Jews. And so I'm telling it, but the Rebbe is, we are here. We're not going anywhere. We are in this world. We're not going anywhere forever. It seems like God really wants us here. And we're sticking around. Anyway, so the Rebbe says we need to say this with the strongest Jewish stubbornness. Mit der tausendjährigen Stolz, with the thousand-year Stolz means bravery or pride. With our thousands-year-old pride. Al tigi b'mashichi. Do not touch my anointed ones. Ubeneviyei al terei, my prophets, which refers to all the Jewish people, did not do any harm. So the previous Rebbe is stating this state to declare, you see, so our fathers, if my father was able to say this, knowing the dangers of who it was, that means he was willing to willing to die for what he believed in. Because saying things like this can land you very easy a bullet in your head. And my father said it. So that means that they are really people who are willing to sacrifice themselves. So it's no wonder that God was with them. So we are asking God to be with us as well. After the previous Rebbe concludes, he says, this is the way a self-sacrificing Jew speaks. But we do not have that strength. To say it open in front of the whole world. He says we don't have that strength while he's saying it. And to show everybody and to display to the whole world the despicable lowly acts, was die etliche hunderte zewilde für die jüdische Ingelech, which a few wild, wayward Jewish kids. He's talking about in Russia, who was really the ones who arrested the previous Rebbe? They were the Jewish part of the communist government. It's like it wasn't even the Gentiles that were like, it was the Jewish kids or the Jewish youth that joined the Communist Party, who wanted to prove to the Gentile communists that they're more communist than the communists. So they were the ones who persecuted any Jew who was keeping the mitzvot and wanting to hold on to Jewish observance. So the Rebbe says we have to say to the entire world, these little children, these little kids over here, a couple of hundred of them who got themselves into powers of position and think they run the world. Was die etliche hunderte zewilde für jüdische Engelach tun über Jiden und Jüdischkeit, what they are, the crimes that they are doing against Jews and Judaism. Alle wissen of the Gesetz, everybody knows that according to the books, erlaubt lernen Torah and hüten mitzvahs. According to the essential rules of the government, you're allowed to learn Torah and do mitzvahs. Mit gewiss Agbolos, there are certain limitations, the Rebbe says, but nor the Mesiris and Alilis, it's all fabrications, and it's all libels that they make up. Fieden uns in die Türmes and in die Katrages, and it's all these libels that lead us into prison and lead us into all the camps. Why? They twist it. They make up stories about. Essentially, if you follow the law of the book, we're pretty good. We have good standing. In das is unser Barkashem Hashem Yisbarach. And this is our request from God. Al Yazveinu val Yachenu, God should not forsake us. That Eberster soll uns geben die richtige Starkheit. God should give us the right strength. Nicht nispol werden von the Yesudei Aguf. Not to become broken or become impacted by the physical hardships that we're being put through. Jeder einisch chas v'sholem was me kriegen faracheder. Every punishment, God forbid, that you receive for keeping a Jewish underground school open, for learning Torah, for studying Torah, for hitting mitzvahs, for observing mitzvot, darf das uns geben a stark. The punishment itself is supposed to empower us. Und der heilige Arbeit für Chizuk Hayadus. You know, the very idea that they're punishing us and putting us into jail or doing all kinds of prison and sending us into the gulags and doing all kinds of other things, that itself is supposed to provoke us to strengthen even harder our determination to keep these Jewish institutions alive. Wir dürfen gedenken. We have to remember, as Turme in Katrige is mehr nicht wie a zweiteilige Sache. We have to remember that imprisonment and the gulags is only temporarily. Torah and mitzvahs for Yisrael is an ebik. The Torah, the mitzvot, and the Jewish people are eternal. So yes, we hit a bump in the road. We hit a situation where they think they can throw us into a dungeon. They think they can imprison us, but that's all. Eventually they're not going to be here and we're going to be here. It's like, okay. So now he concludes. Seid alle gesund und stark in Gashmis. He says everybody should be healthy and strong physically, and in Ruchnius and spiritually. Ich hoffe Hashem Yisbarach. I hope to God, as mein Zeit weile ka'oinish, that my temporary punishment, that they're punishing me now, that be'ezras Hashem bringen a frische Kraft, that they're sending me to exile, will bring, with God's help, a strengthening in them ebik and chizuk hayahadus, in the eternal strengthening of Judaism. And as it mekuyim werden, and it will be fulfilled, as Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu, that God should be with us, kasher hoyem avayseinu, like he was with our fathers, al yazveinu v'al yachenu, God will not forsake us and not abandon us. Ulchol b'nei Yisrael yi'or, and to all the Jewish people there will be light, beruchnius ubagashmi, spiritually and physically. That was the previous Rebbe's talk on the train on Gimmel Tammuz. By the way, that's the story of Gimmel Tammuz. That's where it starts. So those who believe that Lubavitch came to an end on Gimmel Tammuz, if that's that's what Gimmel Tammuz was, such words, then I don't know what to say to you. In any case, now let's learn the discourse. Let God be with us, with our fathers. Should not forsake us and should not abandon us. It is known, the sicha. The sicha means it is known, the talk, that the redemption boy, the Rebbe says, which means Bala Geula, the redemption, the one who we're commemorating his redemption, said on the third day of Tammuz in the year 1927. That was the year of the arrest, and that was the year of the liberation. And what did he say? Mi beten b'Hashem Yisbarach. We are requesting by God, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu, that God should be with us. Kasher hoyem avayseinu, like he was with our fathers. Al yazveinu v'al yachenu, he should not forsake us, he should not abandon us. So what did he say? Hashem Yisbarach zol zayin mit uns. God should be with us. In ved zayin mit uns, and he definitely will be with us. Kasher hoyem avayseinu, like he was with our fathers. V'tzarech lahavin, we need to understand. V'tzarech lahavin, we need to understand. V'tzarech lahavin, we need to understand. So till now he quoted. Until now he quoted what? The opening lines of the previous Rebbe's talk on the train station. Again, and what did he quoted the verse, and then he says, we're pleading with God, we're asking God to be with us, and we are also certain that he will be with us. So the Rebbe asks the question. We need to understand that requesting and promising are two separate things. And at first glance, they're also to a certain degree opposites. Because if you are declaring that so it will be, so why are you asking? if you're confident that it's going to be something, if I say I'm giving you $1,000, so why am I pleading? Oh yeah, I need $1,000. If I said I'm giving it to you, it means I have it. So if the Friedrich Rebbe is saying God will be with us, so why is he asking? And if he's asking, which means he doesn't have control over it, he's pleading, he's asking, then how can he then say for sure, definitely God will be with us? It's one of the two. Can't have both. But nevertheless, he says, we are requesting, which is a request. Zol sein mit uns, he should be with us. And then he said a promise. In vet sein mit uns. That means he will be in Yiddish. Shabakoshahu, that the request is, loirak zol sein mit uns, elegam vet sein. And more than that, it's not only that he's saying, he's giving two interpretations in the verse, both interpretations. That also is a problem. It's either or. It's this or that. But it's much more than that. He says we are requesting from God that he should be with us and that he will be with us. That means that the will be with us is also something that he's requesting. But that literally doesn't make any sense. I'm requesting that you will give me money. I'm requesting that you should give me money. What do you mean? I'm requesting that you will give me money. You can't make a request that you will give me money. You will means you know a fact. You will give it to me. Requesting is I'm asking for the money. How can you have a request that you will? It just doesn't work. But he said those words. He says, "Mir beten by Hashem Yisbarach, as a zol zayin mit uns. He should be with us, and that he will be with us." And even though in the verse it works, because the word Yehi, you can read should be or will be. When you have a yud in the beginning of the word, I can be asking you that Yankel Yelech should go. I'm asking. Or I can say Yankel Yelech, Yankel will go. In Hebrew, will and should, both those words start with a yud. And they can both mean the same thing. V'agam shetevis Yehi, hu loshen bakasha, can mean a request. V'gam loshen avtacha, and also a promise. Like the word ve'ahavta, the Rebbe brings in footnote 3, that when it says ve'ahavta Hashem Elokeinu, you can read it, you should love God. It's a commandment. You should love God, your God, with all your heart. You can also read it, you will love. You will. It's saying that this, eventually everybody will love God. So even though the word tolerates both, but there's still two interpretations in this verse. And in the Rebbe's sicha, in the Rebbe's talk, he includes in one statement, he includes both these interpretations. Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu, God should be with us, and Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu, God will be with us. How can you both have it a request and a statement at the same time? The previous Rebbe continues in the Sikha. What is the request? God should be with us like he was with our fathers. And we said, Shlomo HaMelech said this when he built the Beis HaMikdash. And Shlomo HaMelech means that God should be with us like he was with King David, like with David HaMelech and the previous. And the previous Rebbe was saying it, that God should be with us like he was with his ancestors, with the great tzaddikim, with the whole line of Chabad and the Baal Shem Tov. And God should be with us like he was with our fathers. But why do you have to say that? Why would God not be with you? So he says, because they were much greater than me. That's what he's saying. How was he greater? So he explains how they were greater. So let's see. Like he was in our fathers. That's a request. And also a promise. Who? The previous Rebbe continues these words. Even though we can't compare ourselves to our fathers. Now the Rebbe says, and then he explains how he can't compare himself to his father. We'll see in a moment. But they were willing to sacrifice their lives, and we're somehow lacking. Fine. But the Rebbe says that when the Friedrich Rebbe said that, it wasn't just his own interpretation. It's actually based on a Maimer Chazal. It's based on a teaching of the sages of what this verse means. On this very verse, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu, God should be with us like He was with our fathers. There is a midrash. It's a midrash. It says a medrash. This medrash is a medrash Tehillim. It's not on the pasuk in Malachim. It's in Tehillim. And the medrash says, "V'chein shloima omer lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu." So too King Solomon said in front of God, "Melech shu seicher payalim," a king that hires workers, and oisen malachtan yafe, and they do beautiful work. A king hires workers who are going to work for him. They do a wonderful job. And he pays them. So King Solomon says, "Ma shvach yesh lamelech." Of course, the king keeps his word, and he's a righteous king. He's a decent human being. You hire someone, you pay someone. He did a good job, you pay the person. Really, if the person did a good job, you not only should pay them, you should add a tip, right? But that's okay. But for a king, it's not a great praise for a king. When is it a great praise for when you say, "Wow, the king is so special"? Is he hired workers, and the workers turned out to be very mediocre. They got the job done as the aim is meshubach. When is the king praised? Kashayisker payalim, the midrash says, when he hires workers, payalim roim, not the best workers. Payalim roim means bad workers. The Rebbe brings on the bottom. There's another girsa. Payalim atzelim, lazy workers. And by the way, in the Sikha, this is the mimer. In the Sikha, the Rebbe in the Sikha on this in this Farbrengen, Tafshin Chav Dalet, 1964, the Rebbe goes in the mimer. He just brings this, but in the Sikha he explains what's the difference between bad workers and lazy workers. Why the medrash? There's two girsas in the medrash. What would mean the difference in it? She'ein oisam alachton, who didn't get the work done. And yet, wages he gives them. I promised you this is your payment, he pays them. This is a great king. This shows on a person's generosity and the king's greatness. And then the Medrash says, and so he says, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu kasher hayem aviseinu, that Hashem should be with us like He was with our fathers. So what is the Medrash saying? That what Shlomo HaMelech was saying should be with us like He was with our fathers was that idea. Our fathers were good workers, and we are not such good workers. We're either the bad workers or we are the lazy workers. And yet we are asking, the praise of the king is that He will still keep His promises. So the Rebbe is saying, so the previous Rebbe's pirush in these words is really based on a medrash. Umevar basich. Okay. So the Rebbe sources it. Now the Rebbe says, but in the Sikh he explains, why are we not like our fathers? Why are we less than our fathers? Is it we learn a little less Torah than them? We don't daven as good as them? In what sense can't we compare to our fathers? Our forefathers, they were literally, in the literal sense, Mesiras Nefesh Yidden, as he calls them later. Selfless Jews who were willing to sacrifice everything. Literally sacrifice their lives, endanger their lives, ala Torah v'mitzvahs, for the furtherance of Torah study and mitzvahs. But we are not, but we're not that way. And the Rebbe asks the most obvious question, which is a question I was telling you before. Considering where the previous Rebbe was when he made this declaration, that he's standing in the train station after he just came out of 2.5 weeks in a dungeon where they almost killed him, and they were sending him off right now on this train station to go to exile for 3 years, and who knows if he's going to come back alive from there. And he stood over there and he's asking God should be with us because our fathers were willing to to give their lives up for the sake of Torah and mitzvahs, and he's not doing that. What landed him in jail? They didn't want to eat knedlach. My grandmother would say, whenever we would say that someone is in jail, and talk about someone, someone, she would say, because he didn't want to eat the lakshan with the yoch. He wanted only the soup without the lakshan. It was just a statement, they would say. That's not why he went. He was in jail because he was engaged in spreading Judaism and in keeping Judaism alive. He didn't have to do it. By the way, most rabbis in Russia either caved in or packed their bags and somehow managed to get out of there. Escaped. The previous Rebbe was the one person who stood like a lion, and the only reason there's Russian Jewry today is because of this one man who literally stuck his neck out. And he knew they're after him. He knew they're looking at him every moment. He knew that he was the enemy number one of the Soviet Union. Literally, he was the top enemy in their minds. He didn't care. He knew that Judaism has to continue no matter what. And the 3 million Jews that were in Russia were not going, maybe more at that time, before the Second World War. How many Jews were there? He knew that the Jews we're not going to allow these Jews to become completely assimilated amongst the nations and lose their connection to Judaism. And no matter what it takes. So why is he saying we're not like our fathers who were willing to sacrifice their lives? He's exactly like, probably, and I would say, probably amongst the Chabad Rabbeim, the one who was most associated with Mesiras Nefesh is the previous Rebbe. They all were Bala Mesiras Nefesh, but the one that is like everything about him is Mesiras Nefesh, that's the previous Rebbe. If you had to find one word in the previous Rebbe and say, what was he? Mesiras Nefesh. Alter Rebbe, you would say, each Rebbe, you would say what their main thing was. Friedrich Rebbe is Mesiras Nefesh. Complete self-sacrifice. So why is he saying that? Tzarech la'av, we need to understand. And more than that, not only did he sacrifice his life weeks before, the very talk that he was giving right now on that train station was the biggest act of defiance which could land him, again, right back into the dungeon. They could have turned him around the 1 second, dragged him right back into the prison. And he would have never seen the light of day again. So the fact that he spoke that way, that itself was Mesiras Nefesh. Was connected in the Siyasa with his traveling, Legolus Kastrama, where they were sending him to this area called Kastrama, which was a town in who knows where. Sha'agolus, this exile, Ulefnei Zahamaiser, and two things, the exile itself, and before this, the imprisonment, came about because of Mesiras Nefesh b'poil ala Torah mitzvahs, on his literal Mesiras Nefesh for Torah and mitzvot. The Yisera Mizu, and even more than this, Shegama, that's what he's saying over here. Not only were his behavior leading up to this a pure act of self-sacrifice for God. Not only that, but as he says in the parentheses, Shegama Amira de Sichazu, even him standing over there and saying this in front of knowing who's listening, Hoysa Mesiras Nefesh, Bipoil, not theoretical Mesiras Nefesh. It was literal Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh means self-sacrifice. Va'afal pikein. And nevertheless, he said, Oymar, she'einanu doimim la'avoseinu, we can't compare ourselves to our fathers, shahaya ba'al Mesiras Nefesh, that they were people of Mesiras Nefesh. What's the obvious answer? What could you answer? You say it's humility. He was humble. But the Rebbe is going to argue, humility, it doesn't mean deceiving yourself. Humility means that, okay, you within a certain spectrum of whatever, you understand, you don't take credit for things, fine. But not that you know, if you accomplish something, you're not going to say you did. No, I didn't. I'm humble. I didn't learn this chapter. You just learned this chapter. I learned it 10 times. You know it. Yeah, I know it. Yeah. Oh no, I don't know it because I'm humble. It's ridiculous. It's not denying something that you have. Oh, so first he wants to give another answer. perhaps we can say that he wasn't talking about himself. He himself, of course, was on the highest level of Mesiras Nefesh. But he's speaking over here in the plural. He's saying mir zenenisht. Mir means we as a whole. So including in himself, he's including maybe all the Jewish people. The Hasidim, especially they were also with him. You know how many Hasidim died because they were doing all what was construed to be illegal. The Rebbe says it wasn't really illegal, but was construed to be illegal. You know how many Hasidim died doing it? So the Hasidim were with him as Mesiras Nefesh, but maybe he's speaking the greater the Jewish people as a whole. Since the request of the Bala Geula, the one who was being redeemed, Elokeinu, that God should be with us. It wasn't only for himself. But he's also pleading for all of the Jewish people. Including people who are not even religious. Including secular Jews. How do we know? Because when the previous Rebbe came out of prison in the end, after he was completely released, he said that the 12th day of Tammuz is a holiday for all the Jewish people, including all of those who are just called Jews with like a nickname, who see their Jewishness just like a nickname, like a secondary name to them. Which means they so don't identify as being part of the Jewish people. For them, it's also a holiday. So you see, the previous Rebbe was not giving up on any Jew. Everybody was part of it. So maybe he's referring to those people. And those people are not even keeping mitzvot when it's convenient. Definitely they're not sacrificing their lives for the mitzvot. They're not even doing it when it's easy to do it. God forbid. And maybe for them he was saying that even though they're not sacrificing their lives for Torah and mitzvot, God should still be with them. So we can say that. Therefore he says, say no, that we're not compared to our fathers. That they were literally people who would give their lives up for sacrifice themselves for the mitzvahs. So this one could be an answer. The Rebbe says it's not sufficient. Why? Because he includes himself. He says ki ba'aloshin. The Rebbe, every word of his father-in-law is like learning a medrash. Ki ba'aloshin, because in the words that his father-in-law used, the previous Rebbe used, he says mir zenen doch nicht gleich zu Avosenu. We are not compared to our fathers. We, meaning all of us, including himself. Kol games atzma, he also included himself. And we cannot say that he included himself. This that he included himself with those that are not Baalei Mesiras Nefesh B'Poel, who b'derech anava, that was humility. Maybe that was humility. This is where he brings that other period. She said maybe it's because humility, because even humility, it has to make sense. You can't claim through humility that you're, if you're a scholar, you can't say you're totally ignorant. You can say, I'm not the biggest scholar. Okay, fine. You can't claim you're ignoramus. It's not true. You know the whole Torah. You're not an ignoramus. You know half the Torah. You're not an ignoramus. It's not humility. Humility has to fit. So where is the previous Rebbe saying this? Similar to how the Alter Rebbe says that even in Tanya, he says right in the first chapter, that Rabbah couldn't call himself a Beinani if a Beinani would be half sins. And half mitzvahs, the person who's doing mitzvahs all day long, never stops learning even for a minute, cannot deceive himself because of humility that I'm... All right. Okay. Now, in addition to the diyukim, to the questions that there are in the Sikha itself, we have another copy, Yossi. Where is it? Oh, up there. It's in the copy machine. On the top. Yeah. So it's the second page now. Sif Be Perik Beis. We need an explanation in the Lashon. Yehi avai Elokeinu imanu sheba'kasav atzma. That in the verse itself, in the words Yehi Hashem Elokeinu, the l'chayra, here's a gewaldige question. La'achrei sha'omrim, after we say, what are we saying? Havaya Elokeinu. You can only ask this question if you're really paying attention to the words. What are we saying? God, our God. The moment you're saying God, our Lord, okay, if you want to be more Hashem, Yehi, what does the verse say? Yehi, let it be, Hashem, which is God's name, Elokeinu, our Lord. If you're calling him our Lord, he's probably with you. Because why would God be yours? God is yours because he's protecting you, he's watching you, he's accompanying you, he's ours, which means he's with us. Then why do you have to say, if you're already saying he's with you, what do you have to say, Imanu, he should be with you? You're already, by saying Elokeinu, you're already making him with you. You're already declaring that he is with you already. So what does it mean, Imanu, he should be with you? If you would say, Yehi Hashem Elokim Imanu, if you say God, the Lord, not connecting, God, the Lord of the whole world, Imanu should be with us. That's a good statement. But once you're saying, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu, let our God, so he's already yours, which means he's with you. So why are you adding, what is added on by saying Imanu with us? Shu Elokai Shalanu, he's our God. So he's already yours. Now, to make the question even stronger, is according to the Hasidic interpretation, the deeper interpretation of what does it mean Elokeinu. Elokeinu means only that we acknowledge him. Elokeinu, he's our God because we're the ones who acknowledge him and serve him. We accepted him as our God. We acknowledge that he's our creator. Chassidus says much more than that. Elokeinu means, Elokim really means the power, the force. The force of what? The force of life. That's the real meaning of Elokim. The Lord means the force of everything, the force of existence, the force that brings it all into being, the power that runs in the world. If we're saying that God is Elokeinu, means he's our power. That means he's infused inside of you and he's your power. When you wake up in the morning, it's God waking up inside of you. When you put your foot on the ground, it's the power of God who's infusing your feet to walk. Every movement, every idea you think of, it's God's power that's now shining in your head. God is the power in everything you're doing. And that's the meaning of Elokeinu. It's very, very powerful. He is our power. He's your force. So for sure he's Imanu, he's with you. Is he not with you? If he's your power, you don't blink your eye without that power. It's like when there's a blackout and the power is off, nothing works. Turn on the power, hit the circuit, whatever, turn on the power, and suddenly the air conditioning goes on, the computers go on, the lights go on, boom. So if you think about it, God is the power. If he shuts the power down, there's nothing. Power is on. Everything works. We're moving. We're thinking. Everything. Our heart beats. Everything is being driven, and we recognize, we sense that God is your power. If that's the case, of course he's Imanu. He's with you. So then, what are we asking? Hashem. After you said already Elokeinu, what is the meaning of Imanu? Especially according to what's explained in Chassidus. Elokeinu, that Elokeinu, Piddush, means Koicheinu, our power. V'chiyoseinu, and our life force. So why do you need another request? Imanu, that it should be with us. And we also need to understand. Umrah, he says, Imanu, with us. And he also says, like he was, Imavoseinu, with our Father. Now he's going to question the word with. Because when you say something is with, then you're already making that entity be secondary to the thing that it is with. You say, who did he go with? He went with with someone. That means that whoever is going along is just going along. Especially in Hebrew, the word im means that it's an attachment. And an attachment is always secondary to the main thing. The lashon im, the word im, noifel, is applicable al davar, on a thing shu tafel al davar shu imay, that is secondary to the thing that it is with it. Come on, example. Yachloiku yarshei habal im yarshei ha'av. It says, it talks about the law that if a woman passes away and she is still, again, this is a woman. Now here's the thing. Usually if an unmarried woman passes away, then her inheritance goes to her dad. If she doesn't have any children, her entire inheritance goes to her dad. Parents, but mainly the father. If she's married, the inheritance goes to the husband. If she's in between being married, she's maybe, I don't know exactly which halacha this is, but if she's kind of not fully married yet, but she's still in between leaving her father's house and going to her husband, so then the law is that the property, her possessions are divided equally between her husband, between her father and her husband. Meaning not only the father and the husband, but also the inheritors of the father and the husband. If the husband is alive and the father is alive, it's the father and the husband. If it's their inheritors, then they'll take, right? Whatever. But who's the primary one? The primary, because she wasn't fully married yet, her primary inheritors are the father. The husband is also joins along to a certain degree. Because sheyarshei abal hem tfelim liyarshei av, are secondary liyarshei av, and he says you can see that in Tosfos Yeshanim, in Yuma, Pehei, and Pirush Harash L'Masechtas Taharis, and Tosfos Yom Tov, where in all these places you see that when it says im means it's with, which is a secondary and less. In other words, it's like 20% versus 80%, or 30% versus 70%. If we're saying God should be with us, what does that imply? That we're doing pretty well with, God forbid, without him. Nice if he lends a hand a little. God should be with us. Lend some support. Like he was with our fathers, which would imply the main thing was the father. The main thing, our father, or the main thing is us. God, please lend a hand. How can you say that? God is everything. Without him, you have no power at all. So the worst, it seems to be, right? The prayer is, God, lend a shoulder. Give us some support. In other words, God forbid, we can do it without you, but help us out a little bit. How can you say that? Imanu, with us, imaveseinu, shavaya Elokeinu, that God, our Lord, who tafel, is only secondary, eleinu, to us, ula aveseinu, and to our fathers. Now, these were all the questions that the Rebbe asks. First, he asked a bunch of questions on the previous Rebbe's words. Number one, how does he combine a prayer and a promise? Number two, how does he differentiate the whole idea that his fathers were Baalei Mesiras Nefesh and he's undeserving when he has the same quality? That was the second question, and he goes back and forth. I tries to give an answer, but that was the main question. Then he turns to the verse itself and he asks the question, number one, what does it mean imanu once you said already Elokeinu? So you're already implying that he's with you, so why do you have to add imanu? Secondly, when you're saying imanu, it seems to reducing God's involvement, that God is only secondary. So what does that mean? So we can explain this al pi hayadua, based on what it is known. The reason there is a statement in the sages where they refer to that there is a great treasure. God has a treasure house. And that treasure house, that a great It's a storage. It's a treasure. It's what's called an oitzer. It's a storage or a treasure. So it says, what's God's treasure? The treasure of Yirat Shamayim, of fearing God. Fear of God, which, by the way, there was someone here a couple of months ago which left such an indent on me. We had him Alav Malka, and was a grandson of Rebbe Melech. I don't know if you were here then, but you were here. And for me, it was worth the whole Alav Malka with this one teaching that he taught. And for me, it was like, I think about it a lot. And he spoke about what is fear of God. And he says, fear of God simply means sensitivity to God. You're very sensitive to, it's like when you, what does it mean? Should you fear your spouse? No, but you should be sensitive. And sensitive means that when you know something's going to bother them, you don't do it. Because you're sensitive to them. You fear. Your fear, that's a little problem in your relationship. You fear. It's not a fear. You're sensitive to the fact that this bothers them. So to sensitive to God is to be sensitive. When God wants something, it's like you can do a mitzvah because you're excited to make God happy and you want to do something, but you can also, you're sensitive to the fact that he desires that, and that you're sensitive to things that he doesn't like, and you don't want to upset that. Not that he's going to punish you, just you're sensitive to it. That's the Yiras Hashem, which is a beautiful word. It takes away the fear from it, but it puts in a much stronger in any case. But regarding fear of God, it says, Otzer shel Yirat Shamayim. It is a treasure of Yirat Shamayim. Now, why is it a treasure? Who? So it says in Rebbe says this is in a mimer from the Tzemach Tzedek, which originates in the Sefer of the Shlach HaKadosh. It's the Shlach HaKadosh's explanation of why the Shlach HaKadosh was a great Kabbalist, 17th century Kabbalist. And so he explains why is the fear of God considered an otzar. It's God's treasure. Just like a king's treasure, ein biyad hamelech lasis otzar. How does a king accumulate wealth? What's the king's wealth? I mean, if you're a king because your father was a king and your father's father was a king and all that, of course you get the inheritance. You know, King Charles was born or whatever. You know, they're born billionaires from the inheritance of the family. But if you're a new king, how do you become wealthy? A king becomes, let's say, a place where they go and they appoint a king. The guy was not wealthy. They elected this person as a king. How does he become wealthy? Similar to the law when it comes to a Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, was important that in order that he have prestige and power and respect, it was also important that he should be greater than his brothers, that he should be the richest of all the Kohanim. He had to be an affluent. So the Talmud say, what happens if he doesn't have any money? He's a pauper and he becomes but he's such a holy man, they choose him as the high priest. So then all the Kohanim have to give of their money and they have to make him the wealthiest. So everybody gives, so they make a big... So similar to that, how does a king become wealthy? The king's become wealthy because he taxes everybody. And the tax and the taxation, this goes to the king's treasures. So the king is not able to make his treasure, the very treasure itself, he can't make it. That's a treasure. A treasure, an otzar, for a king, is a collection of valuables that he needed to collect and take from his subjects. Well, he does their service of being their king. They, in turn, give him their valuables and so on and so forth that make him very wealthy. And guess what it is? It works with God as well. God, only treasure that God has is what he collects from us. Now, he has everything. What can he collect from us? The only thing God does not have is our sensitivity to him. He doesn't have that. Because for us to be sensitive, we're the only ones who can be sensitive to him. He doesn't control that. We'll soon see how little God controls that. The very fact that he gave us free choice that we can ignore him and be completely not sensitive to his will. So if we are sensitive, it's something that he doesn't have that we give him. That's why the only treasure that God has is something that he needed to get from us, which is the fear of God. Everything else he has. But the fear of God, Yirat Shamayim, we have to give it to him. It's an amazing idea. A king cannot make a treasure. He has to collect it from others. Especially God, because God doesn't have ancestors. You understand? He didn't receive it Yerusha from anybody before him. So he's a new king. Meaning, when he created the world, he became a king. So his creations are the ones who give him the treasure. Money, he has enough. Power, he has enough. But sensitivity to him, the fear of him, and he doesn't have that unless we give it to him. Kain hayira, so to the fear, it's the otzer, it's the treasure of the King of all kings, God. Einoi b'yedei shamayim, is not in the hands of God. How do you know it's not in the hands of God? Kamayim Arizal, the sages tell us. By the way, the sages have the best teachings. Hands down. From the beginning of time until now, the best sayings and the best teachings, way beyond everybody else, are the sages, Jewish sages. And what do they say? Kamayim Arizal, the sages say, Hakol b'yedei shamayim, everything is in the hand of heaven, Chutz miyirat shamayim, besides the fear of God. The fear of God doesn't have that. And that's up to us to fear him. We can choose to fear him, or God forbid, not to fear him. Okay. Now let's take that deeper. And we can add something on. You might say, well, loving God is also one of those things. No? God can't create the love for himself. We have to love him. If you give him your love, you're loving him. If you're not giving him your love, he's not loving him. You can choose to love him, to admire him, or not. Obviously, you study, you learn, you engage with God, you start loving him. You can choose not to love him, and you won't love him. So why are we emphasizing only the fear of God? Why not the love? The truth is, anything that has to do with us serving him, every mitzvah, is something that God doesn't have a mitzvah unless we do it. He can command us, but the actual action of the mitzvah, the study, we have to do it. It's a commandment that he commands us to do. If we don't do it, then he doesn't have it. So why are we emphasizing that only on the fear? We don't say that God has a treasure of mitzvot. It doesn't say that God has a treasure of Torah. It doesn't say that God has a treasure of love of God. But it does say that God has a treasure of fear of God. What's the reason? So that's why the Rebbe is going much deeper. And he's explaining, no. Love, God is controlling. God can make us love him. But the one thing he can't make us is fear him. That's really cool. We'll see why. The real meaning of fear, that he doesn't have. The love is really not in his hand. Is in his hand. So it's not really a treasure. How does he make us love him? He can turn on the dial and make us feel him till we love him. He did it by the giving of the Torah. He held a mountain over our head, and the Alter Rebbe explains that he became so lovable that we could not say no to him. But why can't he do the same thing with fear? We'll see in a moment. Simply, he could. In a sense, we can say he can scare us more than he can make us love him. Love him is like a little bit hour. We can say, oh, no, I'm not impressed. But fear, he can really, all he needs to do is really give us like 5, 6 really big thunder. Like, boom, boom, we're all scared. Right? It's very easy, like, to scare human beings. If we can add, why does it say it by fear? Even though this idea that God needs, so to speak, the human, needs to get something from us. This line would make Manis Friedman very happy. It says over here that God needs. That's the big fight that goes online. I don't know, they're so busy with it all day long for the last 15 to 20 years. Everybody's busy He's busy with the same fight with everybody. He says God needs our mitzvahs, and all the rabbis screaming he doesn't. So here the Rebbe says that God needs tzarich, but the Rebbe adds one word, kiviyachol. Kiviyachol means so to speak. Really needs, not really needs. The person. So that hagam she'en yezeu b'chol mitzvahs. This is in all the mitzvot, in all the mitzvahs. So why are we emphasizing it on fear? So the Rebbe says, why? In order for the mitzvahs to be done correctly, it's through love of Hashem and fear of Hashem. But the Rebbe is explaining that the love is something that God can get on his own. He doesn't need us really. He doesn't need us for that. He can receive the love without us offering it up to him. Why? Because he can compel us to love him. Because the difference between love and fear, the avas Hashem ba al yedei gilui or malmayla. Love of God usually comes because God tickles your soul. God makes, of course, obviously we have to make an effort. We make a little bit of an effort and God opens up. Like it says, open up just a little, the sages say, open up just a tiny little hole and God will open up like the entrance of the temple. Huge open. So when a person tries to make a little bit, reach out, God helps you be sensitive, not feel him. And when you feel him, it creates that love. So the love can come from above. A miracle happens, an incredible thing happens, and all of that awakens the love. But the yiras Hashem, but fear of God, comes be'ikr. You see, this is a very important word. Be'ikr means primarily. It doesn't mean that God cannot engender fear, but the real depth and the real meaning of fear can really only come from us. Through the person. Why? And he gives an example. Very interesting example. Yiras melach basav redam, the fear that there is from a human king. This that the countrymen, the people, the subjects of the king, they fear their king. Is because they accepted their king to be their king. You would think a king is feared because he's the king. But the real fear of the king is because is due to the fact that the subjects accepted the king to be their king. Maybe not. The king is the king. It's because you coronated the king. Obviously, if you're born in the kingdom and the king is king already, not every person who's born steps up when they're 5 years old in front of the king and says, "Hey, I'm accepting you as my king." It's kind of a matter of fact. The king is the king. Again, this is a little difficult for us because we don't really have, a king. Although they're accusing Trump to be the king, but we don't really have the type of kings where the king really is a king, a super authority, an absolute authority. But in any case, he says the reason the people fear the king is because they accepted the king to be their king. And that itself, the acceptance of the king, is done through the people. The Kabbalah Samalchus Uadeyam, because the accepting of the king, accepting of sovereignty, has to be from the people. This is based on the idea that true sovereignty is if it was voluntarily accepted by the people. If it's not voluntarily accepted by the people, then it's not kingship. It is what's the word they use? It is dictatorship. And dictatorship is not a king. A dictator is not a king. A king is someone who is willfully accepted by the people. And their acceptance is what gives him the authority to be their sovereign ruler. That's why we say, Ki Hashem amlucha, to God is kingship, umoshel bagoyim, and he's a ruler over the nations. That means real kingship only comes for those who accept him voluntarily. And that's the Jewish people who accept God as their king. And a lot of believing Gentiles who also accept God's kingship. But then how about those who don't accept God's kingship? They're not God's subject. They're still God's subject. God is still controlling their lives. But he's more of a dictator. Sometimes he lets them get away with stuff for a while, but in the end, everybody has to give an accounting in front of God. No one escapes God's jurisdiction, but that's dictatorship. Kingship are those who willfully and excitedly accept the Lord as their king, accept God as their king. And that's what really brings the fear. Once you accepted the king, then you have fear of the king. How do you know? What happens if you didn't accept him as the king? He says a very interesting, in footnote 15, he says a very interesting idea. Vaharaya, what's the proof? Shrei melech, maybe a king is someone who because of his greatness, because of his power, casts a fear on everybody. Maybe they fear him because he is casting his dominion and his power over everybody. Why are we saying that? It's because you accepted him as your king, that's why you fear him. So he proves it from an interesting idea, that if you see a great king, but he's not your king. If you live in France and the king of Germany came to France, you'll stand by, you'll say, wow, it's pretty impressive, this, that. You don't have any fear. Next to you is standing a Frenchman and he's trembling. The German doesn't care. He's admiring their wealth, he's admiring the thing, might even like the king, might even be impressed by his speech, but doesn't have the fear. Why? Because he's not his king. Why is he not his king? Because he didn't accept him. You might say, not because of acceptance, you might say because he doesn't have jurisdiction on the German. He has jurisdiction over the French people. Because again, when we're talking about fear over here, we don't mean fear of punishment. That the king can execute you, God forbid. We're talking about a deep inner submission and a deep respect. And that I will do as you say because you said so, and I must do what you say. Not because I'm afraid of the punishment. Because you are the ultimate master. And your word carries tremendous weight, and I must listen. Not fear of punishment. That is because there is a submission of the people. The people accepted the king. So the fear comes, and therefore the same is with God. Our fear of the Eibishter, our fear of God, is because we accept his kingship. We declare him as our, that's why Rosh Hashanah is the root of Yirat Hashem for the whole year. Because in Rosh Hashanah, we all stand there and declare, God, you are my king, and I'm your subject. And that's what establishes kingship, and that's what establishes the fear. And that's why we say that the treasure of God is fear. Because the treasure of God is from something that God can't, he must collect it from others. We must give it to him. What do we give God? That we accept him as our king. And we fear him. Again, because accepting the king is only through the people. But by the way, this applies to Mashiach as well. We're sitting in a world and we're waiting for Mashiach. Maybe Mashiach has to be accepted by the people. Maybe it's not like people always thought that there's someone who drops down from heaven. I'm a Mashiach. Maybe there is an acceptance. Because he can only appear as Melech HaMashiach. He's already king when he appears. So he has to be accepted. But in any case, Soim Tasem Alecha Melech, you have to place upon yourself a king. That's what the verse says. Based on this, we can explain. Why does it say, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu? God should be with us. Which means, as we said earlier, secondary to us. Now we'll understand why. Because in the fear of God, in the experience of fear, God, what role does God play in the fear, and what role does the person play in the fear? Well, we play 70% of the role in the fear, and he plays only 30%. God, of course, helps us fear him. There is assistance, but the primary bulk of the responsibility of fearing God must come from the person. We must wake up in the morning and say, God, I surrender to you. You are my king. And now that then you'll be sensitive to God's will. That's what Hero Israel means. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad means accepting the yoke of God's kingship. And now, once you accepted God, you'll be sensitive to his will. You'll fear his commandments. Not because you'll be punished. Because it comes to Judaism, we don't find that every time you do something, you're not allowed to get punished. We are, but not right away. We don't see it. It's not a tit for tat. You can live your life totally ignoring the mitzvah. How do you become very sensitive to Torah, to Shulchan Aruch, to fear the mitzvah? When the mitzvah says something, I cannot do what it says differently. It all depends on how you said Shema in the morning. When you say Shema in the morning, you accept God as your king. Now you're my king because I accepted you. And that acceptance, so that's why, and that acceptance is the bulk that sets the fear. And that's why when it comes to fear of God, God's role in that fear versus our role in the fear, Hashem is only secondary in that element. Because most of it has to come from the person. Now, who says over here, why is Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu talking about fear? It's talking about God being with us, protecting us. Where do we see that Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu is talking? You're right. If we're talking about fear, fear of God comes primarily from the person. We would say the opposite for one moment. If we would be talking about love of God, if we were talking about love of God, it would be the opposite. We should be im Hashem with God. Because if we would be praying for love, it would be the opposite. Hashem, tikach osanu itach, make us with you. Yehi itanu imach, we should be with you. Why? Because when it comes to love of God, 70-80% is in God's hands. God has to shine his light upon us. We have to pay attention, of course, but once we pay attention and God is shining his light upon us, we're going to love him. But he's warming us with 70% of that love is coming because God is warming yourself. When it comes to fear, the what is the word? Otis? What's the right word? It's upon the person. What's the word? What? Onus. Oh, that's what it is. The onus is upon the person. It's upon the person. That's why we say, let God be with us. Oh, if so, but how do you know? What does it have to do with fear? Maybe. How do you know this verse is talking about fear? So he's going to explain in a moment. This verse is talking about Mesiras Nefesh. The previous Rebbe is asking for help in God for himself and for the Jews that he left in Russia to continue devoting themselves to Torah and mitzvot, that God should help them have Mesirat Nefesh, not be he wasn't asking, of course he was asking God to make it easier for the Jews in Russia. But he knew that there was a decree that the Jewish people were going through something, a challenge. This was like one of them. It's like a surfer who's in the ocean. This is a wave coming. And the previous Rebbe knew that this wave might last 70 years. It's not going to be an easy wave. We have to go through this, and we're going to have to be ironclad. And we're going to have self-sacrifice. He's asking God for assistance in the self-sacrifice. See how deep it is over here? It's not like, oh, be with us, No, be with us in terms of us. Give us the strength for the self-sacrifice. But in that, we have to realize that we're the ones who got to do the bulk of the work. We have to, because self-sacrifice is in the same wavelength as fear. Self-sacrifice comes from the person, as he's going to explain. It's not. You can't be inspired from the outside for self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice is a we'll see in a moment why Hashem can't sizzle you with light till you'll sacrifice yourself. It doesn't work that way. The sacrifice has to come from an inner choice coming from the human being. I want to give my life for God. It's natural to your soul, but in the soul itself, it's the soul gives itself over completely to God. So in that sense, it's like fear, which has to come from us. And therefore the request is, you should be with us. Assist us, help us in it. Because it's in fear of God, which in general, fear of God is the beginning of a person's service. The ikra and its core, the sharsha and its root. Primarily, it's man's service. And the illumination of light that comes from above. Havaya Elokeinu. Yeah, of course, God is going to help you. It's only, God is really only lending a hand to a person. If you want to fear God, God will give you some help. But you're in the driver's seat. We're the ones who are, the main paddle. You go on a kayak, the main rower, the one who's really putting in all the. Then there's a back pedaler who's helping out a little, sticking in that that thing to add a little, but the person who's giving the strength. Who's doing it? God says, you're the one doing it. I'll paddle along with you a little bit. Imanu is with us. He's going to speak about Mesiras Nefesh in a minute. The reason. Now, why is that? Let's get a little deeper. Why is it that fear really only comes from a person? Why can't you impress fear upon someone from the outside? Again, let's understand something. The fear of punishment. So if I'm fearing a punishment, I'm not fearing the person. I'm fearing what the person can do. That's not fear. That's not fear of the person. That's fearing. I'm fearing your police. I'm fearing I'm fearing for my life, but I'm not fearing you. Fear is a deep sense of humility in front of someone. It's humbling, it's humility, it's feeling small in front of something very big. And feeling insignificant in the presence of somebody far more important than you. That's the fear. And that's why you're so sensitive to them. So much so that you're going to go out of your way, make yourself uncomfortable so that they shouldn't be disappointed. So you have to feel that significance of the other person very strong. Why can't that be impressed upon a person? From the outside, why does the person have to choose to surrender themselves to someone and make them their king? Why is that? The reason for this. That fear comes primarily through a person's service. Yeshleima, we can say, what is fear? Fear means, as we said just now, complete surrender in front of someone. Bittul, nullification. Love is not nullification. Love is the opposite. Null is an expansion of self. When you're loving somebody and something, you're expanding yourself. It's I love. Fear, you're shrinking in front of something. You're becoming less important. It's becoming less you. Ubefrat, and that's true by all fear. Ubefrat yiras hamelech, and primarily there's different types of fear. There's the fear of a king. Soim tasam alecha melech. You put the king upon you. Shetahei emasei elecha, that his fear should be cast on you. Sha'abitel de yirazu, that the nullification of this fear. Kasherem zeshu avdei shal melech, which this type of this nullification of this fear is connected to being a servant of the king. The teva ha'eved, it is natural to a servant, she'emasu pachad ha'aden olav, that the dread and the fear of the master is upon him. Servants feared their masters, even if the master was a little guy and the servant was a big giant of a fellow. He still feared him because he knows my life is completely secondary to this individual. My entire existence is to make this person comfortable, happy, beautiful. I don't live for me. I'm living for him. That's how servants really felt. A real servant felt that I serve a purpose to someone. Again, servitude is out today because we all have this whole idea of freedom. We all do with our lives. That's why it's hard also to be a real servant of God in today's world. Because we don't have this notion even of servitude. We don't really see it. But with God, it's supposed to be that way. A complete, like, my life is not about me, and it's not about my enjoyments, and it's about making sure that God has what God wants of me, and that's primarily in my life, not what I want. What my master wants. And when there's a conflict between my desire and his desire, it's his will, not my will. So that's Sha'bitel de Eved ubitel betachlis. Now this nullification of the servant, this surrender of the servant, is an utter surrender. Elokeinu ba al yidei adam dafke. And precisely because of that, it can only come from the person himself. Since the servitude of a servant, especially a servant of a king, is utter. What does utterly mean? Utterly meaning my entire existence is I'm existing for you, not for me. Myself, my very self, is not for myself, it is for you. From where? At the very, it's not only that I'll give you from my time, I'll give you from my resources, I'll give you that's a worker. A worker takes of their time and they also get wages for it. The servant belongs to the master completely. His entire being. There isn't one cell in his that belongs to him. His entire is from his very nucleus of existence is surrendered to his master. Now, how can someone... Now, you were born that way. You were born that way. You were born in slavery. You're born in slavery. I understand. But if you weren't born in slavery and you're becoming a servant, now not in a way where pirates grabbed you and they sold you into slavery, because you don't want to be a servant, but you have no choice. They're if you don't want to be beaten to a pulp, then you're a servant. Fine. I'm not talking about that. Again, that's all external. Talking about how does a person become a servant? So you might say that what? You meet someone who is incredibly charismatic, dynamic, amazing individual, who you know is like a billion times more important than you are. And you admire that person. And you realize that living your own life in the pursuit of your own self is really meaningless if you can only become part of this individual's life. And you surrender yourself completely and say, I am yours. I'm giving you my entire me. That's the real servant that we're talking about here. Now, if you're doing that because you choose to do that, that's when you can do that. But the question is, can a great individual, if you're not interested, if you're not showing up, if you're not coming and knocking on his door and saying, I am yours, can someone impress that upon you by not forcing in the sense of like the pirates, would abduct you and sell you to slavery? I mean, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, can someone what's the right word? Dazzle you enough and kind of impress upon you their own importance, that you should, that will make you become their servant? Can they compel you with their greatness to become a servant? So this is what the Rebbe is explaining. No, they can't. Because any influence that's coming from a person from the outside, let it be any kind of inspiration or whatever it is, they blow your mind with their depth or whatever it is, but it's coming from the outside. It can change a person. It can have an influence on a person, but it can change the image of who you are. It can't change your essence. The only way you can move your essence is if you choose to move it. So an inspiring teacher, a great sage, a great influencer can have such charisma and such that they blow you away. You become their groupie. You become they're obsessed with them and this and that. You're running after them. But you're not their servant. To become their servant, it's about, at a certain point, a decision you need to make and knock on their door and say, Hineni, I'm yours. I'm surrendering myself to you. Because the very nucleus of self, no one can control that. That's a decision coming, and even God cannot do that to you. That's what he's saying. Give yourself up to God. You have to choose to do that. You can see the biggest miracles. That might be reasons why you will choose it. I'm not saying that will not be the consideration of why you will end up choosing it. But the choice itself has to be a choice. What I'm saying is that the influences that self, that can't do it. In other words, the other can't transform you into the servant. They can't zap you with their light and transform you into the servant. They can set the circumstances which will bring you to have such admiration for them, which will then in turn make you consider, and you might make it, and you can, but because it's your own choice, you can always say, I'm not doing that. You can always turn your back and say, I'm not doing that. I'm following you, I love you, I admire you, but I'm becoming yours, that I give my entire being up for you? No. For those who don't really understand what we're talking about, I only have one example for this. How many servants does the Lubavitcher Rebbe have? Quite a few. He has a lot of admirers, but he does have servants who literally stripped themselves from all I. They have no self anymore. They're just the Rebbe's subjects. And those who don't know the Rebbe and didn't learn Hasidus have no idea what I'm talking about. Complete devotion, I'm not living for myself. I'm living because I know he's got the dream. And what's his dream? His dream is God's dream. And he's got the wherewith to get it done. And I'm enlisting to be his. So, but there's a choice you have to make. You can be inspired, you can like his teachings, you can be like, wow. Or you can show up and knock on the door and say, hey, my life is no more mine, it's yours. Wherever you send me, I go. And that's what the Rebbe did. He sent his shluchim all over the world, made them go to places which are so uncomfortable and so unconducive, both physically or spiritually. Then he took care of all of them, because all of them actually became, thank God, the Chabad houses are not poor, and the Chabad houses, some do struggle, but they grow, and spiritually, Baruch Hashem, they gain, and all. But that's the Rebbe's blessings. But when you go out, it's a complete, and it's not, you ask, what's your commitment for? I'm going for a couple of years. No one goes for a couple of years. You're going for lifetime. What's going to be with your kids, with education, with the Rebbe sent. When a lot of Hasidim or a lot of people never made that move. I'm not saying anybody that's not an official shliach doesn't do this. A lot of people are the Rebbe subjects and they're not officially, but they're still, well, people are dead. You ask me for a donation, give a donation. You want me to support your project, do that too. But you reserve the self, like to be, I'm still living my life. I'm doing my things. And if you need me for some things, I'm depending how inspired I am, I'll lean in a little bit. Or it's the choice. You surrender. No one is surrendering to the Rebbe because there's an army of police who are going to beat you up if you're not going to do it. No one's going to punish you. That's what I'm saying. It's the only example I have for a real king. How do you get people to actually completely dissolve themselves to you? How do you do that? Only if you are a king. It's only if you really are a king. Then, but the people have to accept you as their king. Then they fear you. And fearing over here is not fear that the Rebbe will punish. The Rebbe doesn't punish anybody. But they'll fear to disappoint you. They'll fear that their actions are causing you to be frustrated or dismayed or disappointed. Obviously, I'm speaking about the Rebbe, but obviously this is the way all Jews ought to be with God. And every human being can become a subject of God. Is surrendering yourself completely to Hashem. But this is the point that he's explaining over here, is that the real bittul, the real nullification of your essence, of being completely becoming a subject, no outside influence can affect that. Even the king can't influence that. The subject needs to accept the king as the king. Then the fear is there, but you first need to accept it. Again, that's why it comes only through the person. The Rebbe says so deep. Because the effect that happens to a person through any kind of illumination from above. This is all, it's like something impressed upon a person. It's like anything that's coming from the outside remains on the outside. Which means it's what am I saying? It can go deep in a person, but it's still considered as it's an addition to you. It's not you. The only one who can change you completely is you. To change yourself at your core, only you can make that change. And therefore, the change that happens through outside influences, it's only in a person's image. Image meaning it's only not only an image, it means only in the form of the person, but not in the substance of the person. But not in a core, not a change in the essence of who you are. A servant is, when you become a servant of someone, you're not just a person who changed their activities. You're not even just a person who has changed their characteristics. You have changed in who you are, at the very, very essence of who you are. You are now completely the others, not your own. You know what the weirdest thing is? This sounds like the scariest, the thing that you would never want to do. I don't even know. I can't even believe I'm teaching this on YouTube. This is like any normal person would say, run for your life. Who want you want to give up yourself completely? God, run. And yet the only happy people are the ones who do this. Because else you're stuck in the miserable self. That is nothing. But if you completely give yourself over to infinity and to boundlessness and to the ultimate true existence, that's where you feel joy. It's not easy because you struggle, because you have to give up immediate gratifications. You have to give up but that's life. Now you're really living. In order to come to absolute nullification, bittul the eved, the nullification of a servant. And there the Rebbe says these words: the difference between a servant and a free person, is in your essence. It's not just in your external behaviors. It's not just in it's who you are. I belong to someone, or I belong to myself. Who do I belong to? And therefore, to make such a deep change, it's only when the person themselves accept upon themselves to be the servant of the king. You have to sell yourself as a servant. The master can't make you do that. And even the greatest king can't make you do that. And now we can say, the same is in self-sacrifice. Here is to feel like a servant or to be a servant, and here is to, which self-sacrifice, give yourself up for God, is the same idea of being a total servant to Him. That's why you're giving your life for Him. You're not preserving anything for yourself. It's on the same wavelength. The kivan shemesiris nefesh, since true self-sacrifice, who bittul betachlis, is the epitome of nullification. Befrat, and particularly kisham asiris nefesh al inyanim ke'ele she'al pidin tzivoy delamayla einim mechiyavam limser nafshe aleihem. Now there is sacrificing your life for God, which is what the previous Rebbe was doing then, and that which he was doing with all of his Hasidim who were with him in Russia. He created an army of people who were willing to give their lives up for for the mitzvot. He inspired that. He inspired that. But he says there's two levels in that. There is a certain obligation. Judaism obligates a person in certain cases to surrender everything, even their life. In other words, the connection of Judaism to God, the obligation that you have, the surrender that you have, is obviously we surrender ourselves all the time. We surrender our monies, our possessions. If mitzvot cost money, what do? You still do the mitzvah. It costs you a lot of money, fine, you spend it. Why? Because the Torah demands of a person to spend their money for God's sake. Whether it's charity, tithing, whatever it is. The Torah demands of you to give of your resources, your time. It's your time, but you're giving it for God, right? The Torah demands of you to give of your time, resources, energies, and give up your pleasures for God all the time. A whole lot of pleasures that are forbidden. You're not allowed to. Torah a lot of times commands you to go hungry for a while because there's no kosher food until you're going to get home. You're starving with this. And everybody around you is sitting around non-kosher restaurants a dime a dozen and you're starving. Nothing to eat. So these are all sacrifices. How far does it go? The Torah even demands your life. Not in every case. But there are times when the Torah says, lay your life on the line. If you have no choice, and continuing living will be at the price of certain violations, that's the only way you continue to live physically in this world. Got to allow yourself to die and not violate. That's, for example, idolatry. If you're being forced to serve an idol, then you're not allowed to. You have to be willing to take the bullet, even if it means ending your life. Okay? But that is limited. That's not every mitzvah. That's not in every commandment. Quite on the contrary. Generally, you're obligated to preserve your life. It's only 3 prohibitions that a person is obligated to die for. Then, there are certain times when we say that it extends when there is a decree against the Jewish people as a whole to get the Jewish people to drop observance. Then you have to even give your life up on things of lesser things. But then there are times when even the Torah says you don't have to give your life up. Certain things, as we said. The previous Rebbe's Mesirat Nefesh that he had in Russia was on things that according to Torah law, you're not obligated to give your life up. It doesn't say anywhere that you have to risk your life to make an underground school. because you can learn Torah yourself. You can teach your children quietly, but you're obligated to risk your own life to make a yeshiva for kids. And they're gonna catch you and they're gonna send you to the gulags for 20, 30 years, and you're probably gonna freeze to death over there or who knows what. You're obligated to do that? No. Go to the rabbi and ask him, according to Torah, do I have to do that? Tell you no. Yet the previous Rebbe sacrificed his own life and inspired thousands of his followers to do that for things that you're not obligated. Where is that coming from? So the Rebbe is saying over here, it's very good. That can definitely not be considered that you were command. See, he's saying that giving your life is a choice that you have to make. No, but sometimes the Torah commands you. Yeah, but even when the Torah commands you, you have to choose to listen to the Torah. That's number one. When the Torah commands you to give your life, you can ignore it, which obviously is a sin, but you can ignore it, or you can choose to listen to the Torah. So the fact that you chose to listen to the Torah and give your life is ultimately the giving of your life is because you chose to do so. But definitely in the cases where the Torah doesn't even obligate you to give your life. And if you're giving your life anyways, it's because you're choosing to do so. And what are you choosing? You're choosing to become God's servant to the point to make God's will the only will that exists. Nothing else exists besides his will. And therefore, even if God is not expecting me to keep to give my life for it, there's no expectations. He never asked me to do so. The will, or in this case, understand something, the continuity of Judaism in Russia, and because if God forbid, the next generation won't be Jewish. So the continuity of Torah and mitzvot and the Jewish objective to make God king over the world and through the Torah and the mitzvot must go on. Why must it go on? Because it's God's will. And other than God's will, I don't exist. There's no me here at all. It's only God's will. It's only when you're surrendered to God to such a deep place that you have no existence at all other than God. Can you give your life up for things you don't have to give your life? But again, that cannot come from inspiration from above. That's a choice you have to make. Why? Because to nullify your essence, only you can nullify your essence. Remember the rule that we said earlier. Any influence that comes to a person from the outside can only change your shape and your form. It can't change your essence. To change on an essential level, that comes from a person himself. So that's what the Rebbe is saying of it. Just like by fear, we said that since fear is nullification, especially the fear of a servant to a king is nullification, and true essential nullification, essential abnegation has to be the person doing it. The same is over here, Mesiras Nefesh, as he says. And especially such a deep Mesiras Nefesh, where it's not even when you're required to do so. And why you're doing it, the only reason you're doing it is because you've identified so much with God's will that there's nothing left of self. You've melted yourself completely into God. His will is the only reality. That's it. It's not like he's got a big will and I have a little will. No, there's nothing left. There's only one. There's only His will. Because then I can measure. I have a will to live. No, there's nothing. There's only one will. It's His will. And if I can contribute to that will, I'm going to do it. No matter what does that mean. I'm going to die for it. I'm going to die for it. But by me keeping the school open, or by me doing this, I'm pushing the divine wishes and God's desire in the world further into active. Maybe I won't win because once I'm dying, but I'll push it a little further. Someone else will grab the ball later, and someone else will grab it, and eventually Judaism will come out on the other side of the tunnel. So then I don't consider myself at all. And you just need now someone to carry the ball, or to move this barrel another half a mile. And at the end of the half a mile, I'll get caught and killed, and I'm done. Yeah, but then what's going to happen? Someone else will be there to pick it up the next half a mile, and eventually we'll get it, and God's will is going to happen. But if I don't do it now, I'm going to live, I'm going to have my life, I'm going to enjoy probably some good food at some points in my life. I'm going to have some nice moments, some nice travels. I'm going to have some nice fun times. I'm going to have some nice things. And I'm going to have things that make me feel good. Yeah, but when you canceled yourself completely, your own will in front of God's will, and that's the only will. And here's the thing. If you're going to sacrifice your life only when God is demanding of you to sacrifice his life, okay. That can be like this. I have a will, but I understand that his will is more important than mine. And since he's asking me to nullify my life, to give my life, I have no choice. I'm going to give my life. But when he's not even asking, he's not even expecting you. So he didn't ask you. You're perfectly fine with him even if you didn't give your life. And yet you're giving your life is because you don't exist anymore in front of his will. You've surrendered yourself. No, to do that, only you can do that. It's not you, but only you can make not you. It's such a it's so deep. And that's why he says, the previous Rebbe said, God should be with us. He should assist us in this. Because, a person, sometimes there's a struggle. You want to, maybe there's a place where you want to still hold on to a little self. It's not easy to make that surrender. On these ideas. Shal pidin, according to the halacha, tzivoy de lamayla, ein mechuyav limsei nafshalim. You don't have to give your life on that. That's why to give your life up, it's primarily lo yal yodei gili or mamayla. It's not that God will shine his light upon you and cause you to give your life up. Elai deisha adam moiseres nafsha. A person has to knock on the door and give God his soul. When we say give God your soul, you're not dying. You're saying to God, I belong to you. And what you want, your wishes and your desire of what you wanted, and that's the only important thing. And I'm surrendering everything in me to that cause. And if it means to die, I'll die too. I'll give my life. So now based on this we'll understand more. The request and the prayer of the Bala Geula, of the previous Rebbe, Basich the Gimmel Tamuz, Hoysabalosh and Akasav was in the verse, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu. God, you should be with us, Kasher Haya im Avayseinu, like you were with our fathers. He diber us be'inyan Avayda de Mesiris Nefesh, because the previous Rebbe was talking then about the service of Mesiris Nefesh. And in this itself, Mesiris Nefesh itself, Bekama v'kama inyanim, he was talking about inspiring his congregation, the Jews, the followers, to give their lives up in matters shal pidin, in matters which, according to Torah law, ein mechuyev limsei nafsha aleim. You're not obligated to give your life up, and therefore, such a level of devotion can only come. That has to come from the person himself. You have to enlist. And since in this service, the main thing is man's work, And whatever kind of inspiration you're getting from above, who Messiah will help you. It will help you. That's why the previous Rebbe says in his opening remarks, standing on that train station, B'lashon HaKosov, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu, with us. We're not going to wait till we experience this euphoria that's going to get us to give our lives up. We are making that decision. We know God will help us. He will help because we're fickle human beings. Even when we're giving our life, we might, whatever. So God gives you strength and he gives you the extra oomph to see it through. But the decision has to be you're doing it. And then God will come back and back you up. Back you up either by saving your life or by helping you die for the sake. Whatever it is. But to be, that's what this request was. Now, this is only the first half of all of this. Now we're holding chapter 4. In chapter 4, he turns the whole thing upside down. He's basically going to show us the second half of the discourse is going to be totally opposite. That you are choosing to do so, you have to elevate it to a point where you have no choice in choosing to do so. You're choosing to do so, but you're choosing to do so not because you're choosing, but because you cannot not choose it. Why could you not choose it? Because God is so true, you cannot not choose it. So you're choosing, but you have to choose it. So basically what he's going to do is he's going to teach us how we have to, even the Mesiras Nefesh, we have to surrender it completely and nullify the Mesiras Nefesh. After you stepped up to the plate to give your life up, you have to nullify, for it to be the ultimate Mesiras Nefesh, you have to nullify even the choice that you made to choose it. I mean, it's not genius. There's geniuses. It's the deepest holiness that has ever been in the world. This is what we're talking about. It's such nullification. It's such complete dissolvement in front of God. This is what's so amazing here is that this is it's like going into the heart of the deepest servant of God that has ever lived. And what's so beautiful is that he's taking us along with him into this thinking and into this world of and enabling all of us to be able to, in some little way, join in this in these deep levels of complete subjugation and surrender our lives completely to God. That's what's so powerful over here. I'll make a little confession. When I started learning this on Sunday morning, I was drinking coffee in the morning. I took out the discourse. I'm sipping coffee and I'm reading this. And suddenly I felt like the discourse is cornering me, literally. It's telling me, hey, so what's with you, huh? Surrendering or not surrendering? You're showing up or you're not showing up? You're joining the team or you're not joining the team? You're going to be a freelancer? You're going to continue being a freelancer or... Literally, I have no idea what kind of struggle I went through while I was learning this. Because I felt it so powerfully, like going right at me. It's a whole story that continues, but it's like... So I feel like I have to brew in this. This is like you have to sit in this. It's like coffee in a coffee maker. Yeah. It's almost like I feel like you have to sit and reread this every day for at least a month. Until you're like... And I think it's so important to realize that this is not against us. In the sense of this is actually the deepest truth of your own soul. You're not losing yourself. You're being your deepest self. But you're being real. instead of living superficial. But this doesn't just mean being religious, they're being observant. This means deep, deep work. Because you can be religious and be completely obsessed with your own. Everything can be about yourself. And here is the total opposite. It's nothing about yourself. Wow. Okay, we'll continue Be'ezus Hashem next week, Thursday night.